Are your most important goals getting buried, crowded out by client work, drowned in the day to day running of your business, or even pushed aside by payroll emails? And I just got to make that quick call. You care about those goals, like hiring the associate so you can stop seeing clients 40 hours a week, or opening that second location you've been talking about for 2 years, maybe raising your rates to reflect your actual expertise. But if we looked at your last 2 weeks, would we see real movement or just you keeping everything afloat? Ambitious goals don't stall because you lack drive and ambition. They stall because your week isn't structured to protect them. And in this episode, I'm going to help you create the space for your most important goals every single week. Momentum is not created annually, it's created weekly. So come on in and join me in this week's episode of Weekly Momentum. Have you ever closed your laptop on a Friday and thought, I worked all week, but what progress did I actually make on my goals? Not how many emails did you delete or how many team questions did you answer, not how many clients did you serve this week. What progress did you make on that ambitious goal you set? The one you said that mattered this year. Because here's what I see over and over again. Women in business don't fail because they lack ambition. They don't even fail because they lack effort. Now, sometimes they're unclear. Sometimes the goal's a little fuzzy. Sometimes maybe it's still forming. But most of the time, they lack weekly structure. Their week fills up before their goal gets protected. And without a weekly rhythm, even clear ambition dissolves. You don't need more motivation. You need a structure that bridges vision and execution every single week. Here's what I see over and over again with high achieving women in business. They're over responsible. They're capable enough to keep everything running, which means the urgency always wins over what's important. And that's how ambitious goals quietly stall in the background, not from lack of drive, from lack of weekly structure. You don't need more inspiration. You need a rhythm, a habit that protects your ambitious goals from drowning in busyness. And in this week's Weekly Momentum, I'm going to give you 3 habits that work beautifully. They're simple, they're repeatable, they're leadership level habits, and they close the gap between I'm thinking about doing it and it is done. If you're serious about achieving those ambitious goals this year, not just setting them, the revenue jumps, maybe from 600,000 to a million or 300,000 to half a million, or from unpredictable income to stable recurring revenue, or the new offer goals like launching the group program inside your therapy practice, adding advisory services to your CPA firm, or creating retainers instead of one-off projects in your agency. Or the expansion goal, opening a second location, adding another clinician, taking on larger commercial clients, or moving from local to regional. Or the hiring goals, bringing in a director of operations, promoting a senior team member into leadership, hiring your first associate so you can step out of full-term delivery. Those type of goals. I get invited to speak to groups all the time, rooms full of smart, capable, ambitious women. Women running physical therapy practices, law firms, women who run retail stores, nonprofits, and all kinds of businesses. And I will ask a simple question when I speak. What are your goals? And what happens? They don't lack ambition. They say things like, I want to open a second location. I want to stop working so many hours every week. I want to increase my revenue by 20%. I want to stop working Fridays. I want to finally write a book. I want to transition from solopreneur to CEO. But then when we look at their calendars and what's on it, client sessions, team check-ins, HR paperwork, insurance calls, payroll issues, vendor coordination, operations, all necessary. But none of it is building the second location. None of it is designing the new offer. None of it is systematizing the business. None of it is creating scalable revenue. They are busy, but they're busy in the operations, the day-to-day running. And that's why the end of the week always feels so heavy. They work hard, but their big goals didn't move. And that disconnect is exhausting. And it's not because they're not capable, it's because they didn't have weekly habits that protect those ambitious goals from the day to day running of their business. So let's look at habit number one so you can learn how to make that shift. If you want to achieve your most ambitious goals, you have to look at them every week, not quarterly, not when you feel uninspired, not when things slow down, weekly. Because your brain prioritizes what it sees right in front of it. If you look at your email inbox first thing in the morning, email is going to become your priority. However, if you see your goals first, your ambitious, your big goals, they become activated and you exponentially raise the odds of you taking some action, no matter how small, towards them. If you want to achieve your most ambitious goals, you have to look at them every week. Here's what happens with real women in business. A CPA sets a goal in January. I want to build a recurring advisory service. Then tax season hits. March, April, May disappear. She doesn't look at the advisory goal for 3 months. Now it feels far away. A therapist sets a goal. I'm going to hire a second clinician. But every week she's focused on client crises, scheduling gaps, insurance reimbursements, and she never rereads the hiring goal. She doesn't look at it. So it never becomes urgent. A woman who owns a small boutique wants to build an online store, but if she doesn't look at that goal weekly, the store floor and the inventory always win. Your brain works on what it sees in front of you. If it sees your inbox, payroll, missed voicemails, and return calls, those win. If it sees your goal, hire director of operations by June, launch group program by Q3, raise rates 15%, or reduce hours to 20 a week, then those goals get to compete and have a chance within the day-to-day running of your business. Looking at your big goals weekly is not inspirational. It's neurological. It keeps ambition visible and upfront. Here's what this looks like. Before you plan your week, create just a simple habit of rereading your annual goals and your 90-day goals. If you don't look at the goal weekly, you get caught up in the busyness. And busyness feels productive, but it's not momentum. Busyness is activity, often responsive, and is driven by other people's priorities. Momentum is moving forward towards what you want. Momentum is making progress. Momentum is focused, measurable, and intentional. And that's why looking at your goals weekly is the first habit. And it goes without saying that you need to have goals. If that's a challenge, then you might want to schedule time with a business coach to help you clearly map out your goals. I'll go ahead and drop a link to my coaching packages below, just in case you'd like to work with me. Let's move on to habit number 2, weekly action. Now, even if you're good at habit number 1, even if you look at your goals every week, if you're not taking weekly action towards them, nothing changes. Clarity without any execution just is going to become frustration. And here's why this matters. Psychologically, your brain is wired to reward progress. When you take action towards something meaningful, even something small, your brain releases dopamine. Not from achieving the entire goal, from moving towards it. You see, progress creates more motivation. It's not the other way around. And that's why posting the job listing can give you more momentum than answering emails all afternoon. Completing one real step towards your goal feels better than a full week of just busy work. Movement builds momentum. Most business owners don't procrastinate on their big, ambitious goals because they don't care about them. They stall because they're unclear on what to do next. When they write down action steps like grow my practice, scale the firm, write the book, hire more support, they often don't act on them because those are outcomes. If you're not crystal clear on the next action, your brain is going to default to the easy win, the inbox, the client work, operations, clearing off your desk, or organizing a bookshelf, because you know how to do that. Ambitious, big goals feel heavy because often it's brand new territory. You don't know how to do it, so it's going to feel uncomfortable. And that's why you need to spell out every step for yourself as if you were telling someone else to do it for you. And the first step towards spelling out your goals clearly is to realize that your weekly goal does not need to be to complete the ambitious goal. It needs to create measurable progress towards it, even if that progress feels ridiculously small. If your ambitious goal is, say, to open a second location, your weekly goal might be email 3 commercial realtors. If your goal is to hire an associate, this week it might be draft the job description outline. If your goal is to raise your rates, this week might be calculate your new pricing model and margin impact. If your goal is to write a book, this week you might be focused on outlining the chapters. Small actions and progress is not insignificant. It's neurological fuel. When you complete that step that you've set aside, your brain says, we're moving. And when your brain feels movement, resistance drops. We procrastinate when the goal is just too abstract. I need to work on hiring. That just creates overwhelm. But draft 5 bullet points outlining the responsibilities for the job. That creates clarity. Clarity reduces friction, and friction is what activates procrastination. So the more specific the next step is, the less mental energy it requires to begin. And beginning is the hardest part. Now, to make sure you reduce as much resistance as possible, every week after you look at your big goal, ask what is the next action step to move this forward. Not what is the entire plan, not how do I finish this, just what is the next action step, as if you were writing it out for someone else to do it, and then schedule it. Make the time to do it before all the client work, before operations, before your week fills up, because let's be honest, if your ambitious goal hasn't moved in 30 days, it's not because you're incapable. It's because it hasn't been translated into one clear, protected action. Momentum is not built in these giant leaps. It's built in deliberate weekly steps. And when you take action, even small action, your energy shifts. I cannot go to hot yoga for 6 months and then go back to 2 classes and I feel like I'm in momentum again. It doesn't take a lot of action to feel less stuck, less behind, less reactive, less stuck in the day-to-day. The way I do this is each week I create what I like to call a weekly scorecard to track my progress. I use one of my Momentum 90-day planners. I'll drop the link below to my planner store just in case you want to check out my planners. And what I do is I set one weekly goal and a weekly top 10, which is a list of to-dos and projects. I like to reserve my weekly goal for the next action that's going to move me towards my 90-day goal. Now, this 90-day goal is tied to my annual goal, so I'm automatically moving towards that, and it ties everything together. But if I don't take action, 9 times out of 10, it's because I didn't write down clearly, or I didn't really define the next action step, as if I were delegating it to someone else. Now, when you're taking weekly action, it might not seem like a lot of progress each week. However, it feels really great to move towards those bigger goals, and that feeling of accomplishment is going to ward off procrastination, and it's going to keep you in momentum. All right, before we move into habit number 3, which is honestly the most powerful habit of all 3, I just want to pause for a second, because once you start taking weekly action towards your bigger goals, something very real happens. You're going to realize how hard it is to protect that time. You're going to define actions you want to take, you schedule them, But then a client needs something, or a team issue pops up, a meeting runs longer than you thought, and suddenly the very work that would move you forward just gets pushed again. Not because you're unclear anymore, not because you're not serious or committed to it, but because your week is just too full. And sometimes what you need is not more discipline. You need some real focused execution time, which is exactly why I created Get It Done Weekends. I mean, how many times have you caught yourself saying, I just need a solid chunk of time to get this done or started, to finally empty your inbox even instead of scanning it and closing it again, to update your website so it reflects who you are now, not who you were 2 years ago. Knock out the 27 little things draining your mental energy every single day. And that's why I created the Get It Done Weekends. A couple of times of a year, usually it's right at the end of a quarter, we carve out focused time at these weekends to wrap up your current projects and build a clear, simple plan for the next 90 days. Now, these are small group experiences, intentionally small, so you don't get lost or overlooked or stuck in the back of the room. You get accountability, you get support, you get feedback. And when you hit a wall, you're going to get laser coaching from me to help you move through it. There's no homework before you arrive. You just show up with your laptop, your planner, and your list. Now, maybe it's getting your bookkeeping and your invoicing caught up so that your revenue keeps flowing. Maybe you're cleaning up systems and automations. Maybe you're updating your marketing materials so that you're actually excited to share what you do. Or you're setting up 90 days of social posts and reels so you're ahead of the game. Or maybe you're figuring out your next big thing and you just need the time to do that. Over the weekend, we use the tools I teach, but you learn by doing so you can continue using them after you leave. Tools like focused time blocking, short recharge breaks, celebrating wins as you go. And then we will close the weekend by mapping out your next 90 days so that you're going to go ahead and leave with direction and momentum. You're going to feel lighter, clearer, and most certainly accomplished. Because these weekends are intentionally small, they do sell out fast. You can reserve your spot at the next Get It Done weekend using the link below in the description. And if you register now, I'll include 2 25-minute private coaching sessions with me before the weekend. We'll use that time to decide exactly what you're going to work on and to remove obstacles ahead of time so that when you show up, you're ready to get stuff done. If you've been wishing for some uninterrupted time to finally move things forward, this is it. You can reserve your spot at the Get It Done weekend now so that we can create some serious momentum together. Now, whether you join me for the Get It Done weekend or you carve out that focused time on your own, here's what matters. Action alone is not enough. You can block the time, you can execute, you can knock things out and get stuff done. But if you don't create the habit of pausing and learning from what happens, you might not end up working hard and going in the wrong direction. And that's why habit number 3 is the most powerful of the 3. If you really want to achieve your big, ambitious goals, you must build weekly feedback into your weekly planning, not vague reflection or operational feedback. Your brain does not automatically self-correct itself. It repeats what's familiar. And behavioral science shows that without intentional reflection, humans default to habitual patterns, even when those patterns no longer serve their goals. So if you don't pause and evaluate the week, you're going to unconsciously recreate it again the next week. So habit number 3, the weekly rewind, is going to interrupt the autopilot. It moves you from busy to conscious CEO. Your weekly rewind habit will take you about 25 minutes, but that 25-minute investment is going to save you hours of misdirected effort. And over time, is going to increase your revenue because you stop repeating mistakes and you start doubling down on what actually works. It's like installing a software upgrade every single week. You run faster, you think clearer, you decide smarter, and you lead stronger. And it's built around just 7 powerful questions. Simple enough to repeat weekly, strategic enough to completely change your entire trajectory. The first question, what are 5 wins from last week? Let's start here because most women skip this. They finish out their week thinking about what didn't get done. But our brain is wired with a negativity bias. It scans for threats, errors, unfinished business. If we don't deliberately capture our wins, our nervous system remembers stress more than progress. So, what counts as a win? Not, I was busy. Real leadership wins are you didn't jump into that client escalation and you let your team handle it, or you ended 2 days this week before 5 p.m. Maybe you protected your prime time block, or you said no to a misaligned opportunity. Maybe you had the hard conversation about compensation with someone, or you documented an SOP instead of just explaining it again. When you name them, you reinforce the behavior that created them. And what gets reinforced gets repeated. This is neurological training for your level of operating, your new operating system. If you don't deliberately identify wins, your nervous system remembers stress more than progress. But when you name wins, you activate reward pathways, dopamine, which reinforces the behavior that created them. What gets reinforced gets repeated. And if you acknowledge that delegating worked more, you're likely to delegate again. And let me say this about wins. We're talking weekly. These are not going to be massive. This isn't I closed a $200,000 deal. It might be some weeks, but usually not. This is I sent the proposal. I didn't overbook Thursday. I delegated instead of fixing. I ended on time, or I had an uncomfortable conversation. Small wins count because momentum is built weekly. And if you really sit with it, you probably have more than 5. So keep going. You might get to 8, 10, 15, because when you start looking for evidence of growth, you'll realize you're moving more than you think. And that shift alone will change how you walk into Monday. Next question. What progress did I make? What were your deliverables? What did you complete? When you ask this question, it protects you from false productivity. Research on motivation, including Teresa Amabel's progress principle, shows that the single biggest driver of motivation at work is making meaningful progress towards important goals. Not admin work like clearing out your inbox, progress. If your goal is to hire an associate or open a second location, maybe build a recurring revenue stream or reducing your client hours, did you do something tangible to move towards it? Was the job description drafted? Did you meet with the banker? Did you outline new pricing tiers? Did you finish one chapter of that book? Busy work does not count. Deliverables count. Now, this question forces some alignment between ambition and execution. And this question protects you from, I'm busy, but I feel behind. You can work 50 hours and still not move towards your big goals. But if nothing moved, that's not failure, it's clarity. It tells you your week was structured for working in your business, not growth work on your business. All information from these questions is helpful. Now, time for the next question. How did last week actually go? Not how it looked on your calendar, not how busy did it feel, not how many boxes did you check. How did it actually go? Did you feel rushed or calm, resentful, clear, pulled in 5 million different directions, grounded and in control? Then go one layer deeper. What worked about last week? Be honest. Maybe you limited meetings to 2 days and your energy stayed steady. Maybe you prepared before your team meeting and it ran smoother. Maybe you blocked 90 minutes of uninterrupted focus time and actually finished something towards your big ambitious goal. Or you delegated something instead of rescuing one of your team members and doing it for them. Then I want you to look at what didn't work. Maybe you opened your email inbox before reviewing your goals for the day. Maybe you said yes to 3 quick calls, or you double booked yourself. Maybe you avoided an uncomfortable conversation and then it lingered with you all week. Or you never defined what done meant, so your work just dragged. And then the most important question, why? Because without the why, you miss the lesson in all of this. If something works, you want to know why so you can repeat it again on purpose. If something didn't work, you want to know why so you can redesign it next time. This is simply learning from your own patterns. Neuroscience shows us that when we pause and we reflect on cause and effect, when we ask, why did that happen? We strengthen our ability to make better decisions next time. You're not just reviewing the week, you're upgrading your leadership. Your leadership doesn't mature because you're working harder or you've been doing it longer. It matures because you become more aware. And that awareness lets you adjust and stop repeating the same bad habits. The next question in your weekly rewind is, what were the biggest obstacles last week? This question protects you from self blame because instead of saying, I need to be more disciplined, you ask, what interfered? Was it too many client sessions in one day? Or no space between meetings? Was it lack of clarity on what my weekly goal was? Was it fear around raising my prices and so I offered a discount, or stepping back into technician mode instead of CEO, or a team member that needs to be clear about what I expect of them? When you identify your obstacles each week, you move from shame about it to strategy. The next question is one of my favorites. What are 3 do-overs from last week? This is the magic. This is where that upgrade gets installed because without a do-over, you've reviewed your week, you've found obstacles, but you've just poked at the problem. When you ask yourself the do-over question, you focus on a solution. A do-over is not, I need to be better. It's clear, it's specific, it's a different choice. For example, if you run a therapy practice and you realized you were drained by Thursday, next week I will cap client sessions at 6 per day is a do-over. Or I will leave 30 minutes between sessions, or Fridays are admin only. If you run a law firm and you keep jumping into your associates' cases, a do-over is if a case question comes to me, I will ask, what do you recommend before giving directions? I'll review files once weekly instead of reacting daily. Or if you run an interior design firm and pricing keeps getting squeezed, the do-over might be next week. If a client pushes back, I'm going to hold the rate. I'm not going to negotiate immediately. A do-over might be that you're going to delegate the onboarding instead of doing it yourself for new employees, or that you are going to document one SOP instead of explaining it again. If your goal is simply to end work by 5 p.m., maybe the do-over is to stop scheduling meetings after 3 p.m. This is the do-over, and here's the science behind why it works. When you pre-decide what you'll do in a somewhat predictable situation, follow-through increases dramatically. Researchers call this an implementation intention. The simple structure, if X happens, I will do Y. If a client asks for Friday, I'll offer Monday. If a team issue lands on my desk, I will coach instead of fix it. If I feel rushed, I will check my weekly goal before saying yes. Your brain loves pre-decisions because they reduce the cognitive load. When you don't pre-decide, you rely on willpower in that moment. And willpower drops when you're tired, stressed, or managing 14 million moving parts. Sound familiar? But when you define the do-over ahead of time, you remove the emotional negotiation. You've already decided. That's why this question is magic. It's the upgrade. You're not hoping next week will feel better. You're actually programming it to run better. And when you repeat this every single week, you don't just have better weeks. You become a different kind of leader, one do-over at a time. Next question. What did I spend most of my time and energy on last week? Now, I want you to answer this by looking at your actual calendar, not your memory, because our memories lie. Calendars can tell the truth if we write everything in. When you look back at the last week, where did your time really go? Not where you wished it went, where it actually went. Was it spent on revenue generating work, leadership, strategy, building the next level of your business, creating something new? Or was it spent on client delivery, firefighting, admin work, other people's urgency, or redoing work that you'd already done? Meetings that maybe you didn't even need to attend. This question really matters because how you invest your time is going to reveal some important things. You can say that you want to spend more time working on your business, doing CEO work, but if 80% of your week is doing client sessions, then you're not moving in that direction. You're not designing your weeks for where you want to go. So if you run a therapy practice and you want to hire an associate, but your entire week was spent in back-to-back sessions, the business that you're building is one where you are the primary clinician. If you run a law firm and you want to transition into higher value cases, but you spent the week reviewing documents and answering minor emails, you're just reinforcing the role of the technician rather than the CEO. If you want to finish by 5 p.m. every day, but your calendar shows meetings until 5:30 every day, the calendar is contradicting where you're going. Now, this question isn't about judging. It's about clear visibility. Behavioral science tells us that what gets measured improves. When you see where your time actually went, where you're spending it, you're going to create awareness, and awareness precedes change. There's also something called attentional bias. We tend to give more attention to urgent stimuli than important ones. That's why email always feels pressing. That's why team interruptions feel urgent. Without reviewing your time weekly, urgency is going to win and continue to win. The other thing I want to mention is that this question is about where did your time and your energy go last week. So it may be that you really needed to have a difficult, uncomfortable conversation with a client or a team member, and you didn't even have that conversation last week, but it hijacked your energy. Being really clear about where our time and energy went is a way for us to see the gap between the week that we intended and the week that actually played out, and to identify where these two assets of time and energy are actually being spent. When we are aware of this, then we can begin to create changes. We can see that there is a expense that is created when we choose, even if we do it somewhat unconsciously, to invest our time and our energy in things that are not really moving us forward. And this may very well allow us to make different choices next week. So it's all part of us upgrading our operating system. Now, after you've asked this question and you've seen where your time and your energy went, you might ask yourself, does this reflect the business that I say that I want to build? And if the answer is yes, excellent, double down on what you did. And if the answer is no, that's great too. You found some places that you can upgrade, and maybe you could actually create some do-overs from that information that you've just gleaned from taking a look at your time and your energy over the last week. When you repeatedly audit where your time and your energy go every week, something shifts. You value your time more and you stop saying, I don't have time. You might start to redesign your weekly schedule. And when you review it weekly, you see where you're honoring your word to yourself and where you are not. You see triggers that are maybe holding you back, distractions and patterns that are getting in the way of you making progress towards those goals. The final rewind question. In 3 words, how would you describe last week? This question, it synthesizes everything. After you've reviewed your wins, your progress, what worked, what didn't, your obstacles, your allocation of time and energy, now you're going to compress it into 3 words, because when you force yourselves to summarize, patterns become even more obvious. Maybe your words are reactive, exhausted, overextended. Maybe it's scattered, interrupted, busy. 3 words, they remove all the story and the drama. They tell the truth. They laser in on what last week was. Your brain is incredibly good at recognizing patterns when you simplify them like this. And here's why this works psychologically. Humans are wired for narrative. When you choose 3 words, you're defining the story of the week. And the story you tell influences the identity that you're reinforcing. If week after week your words are reactive, exhausted, busy, it's not that you're failing, you're seeing a pattern. And patterns can be redesigned. If your words are focused, protected, strategic, then you can see you've built alignment. This question is important because it connects behavior to identity. You're not asking, was I productive last week? You're asking, what kind of leader did I show up as? And here's the real power. If your 3 words don't match the CEO you want to become, that's not a character flaw, it's feedback. It tells you where to adjust your structure and your boundaries and your calendar. Over time, if you do this weekly, you'll start to notice shifts, maybe from scattered to strategic. That's evolution, not from working more, from becoming more aware. Now, I want to talk a little bit about using this weekly rewind with your team. Many of the questions were beautifully inside your weekly team meetings. Maybe imagine your leadership meeting opening with, what are your 5 wins from this week? Or what progress did you make on your projects and goals? You might begin the meeting or weave into it what worked, what didn't, and why. What obstacles showed up? And of course, the magic question, what are your do-overs? Instead of running meetings and asking what's on fire, you're going to elevate the conversation to what did you learn? And when your team comes prepared with wins, obstacles, and do-overs, then they start to think strategically. They start to take ownership and they show up with solutions because they're anticipating the friction and they're reflecting before they're reacting. They're going to learn how to learn. And this is a leadership multiplier. Because instead of bringing you problems, they're going to begin to bring you solutions. So instead of saying, this didn't work, help, they say, this didn't work because of X. Next week, I'll adjust it by doing it over and doing Y. That's growth. That's maturity. That's you raising the culture. And when you model this in your own weekly rewind, your team is going to mirror it. You're going to create a company that doesn't just execute, it evolves. I've spent a lot of time focused on habit number 3, weekly rewind, because without reflection, individuals just repeat the same habits. Teams repeat the same habits. Without reflection, we're just going to regurgitate the week that we had before. The weekly rewind habit helps you catch patterns in week 2 instead of in month 9 of the year. It ensures you're not just working hard, but you're aligned with the goals that you've said are important. These feedback loops, this reflection, allows you to refine and stay on track. If you really want to achieve your most ambitious goals this year, you want to install these weekly habits that really work. You don't need more motivation or a prettier planner or another burst of inspiration. You need weekly structure. You need to look at your goals. You need to take weekly action on them. And you need to weekly rewind so that you can see patterns and course correct. It's incredibly powerful. Ambitious goals are not achieved in January. They're achieved on ordinary Tuesdays. They're achieved when your week protects what matters, when your habits support who you're becoming. You don't need to overhaul your entire business. You need to run your week differently. You just need these 3 simple habits and to use them again and again. And that's how your revenue grows. That's how your hours will shrink. That's how your weekends will get protected. And that's how you're going to stop feeling behind. Ambition without structure just feels like frustration. But when you build in structure, it creates momentum. And momentum, when built weekly, becomes inevitable. And that's it for this week's weekly momentum. This podcast is for women in business who care deeply about the people that they serve, and they also want to lead, grow, and finish the workday without feeling guilty. Every week in Weekly Momentum, we focus on practical structure, clear thinking, and real leadership tools so you can build revenue, protect your time, and run your business like a CEO, not a firefighter. So if this episode helped you, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss next week's reset. And if you know another woman who's brilliant, capable, and maybe feeling a little overextended, send this to her because momentum isn't built in one big push. It's built weekly. Thanks for joining me in this week's episode of Weekly Momentum. I will see you next week.